Okay, so let's integrate this thing with SharePoint. So the user will come here, and what they're going to do is they're going to say width is 300, height is 250, and then we're going to set two specific options, a list URL, which is just the SharePoint site where the image library is stored, and the list name. Now this tends to work better if you just use an out-of-the-box picture library and just call it something simple like pictures. If you dig in, you can kind of do what you want, but that's going to be the best case scenario. So we're just going to pretend that we're on SharePoint/site, and our list library is called, our picture library is called pictures. So let's go over to, let's stay on index.html actually, and we're going to load in another script. And if you're familiar with SharePoint and JavaScript at all, most likely you've heard of the SP services library. The SP services library was written by Mark Anderson, and it's an awesome way to hook into SharePoint's JavaScript web services. So here we go. We're going to include it here. And jQuery.spservices-0.7.2. And I'm working kind of in the confines of SharePoint 2010 right now. This should work for any version as long as the plugins are supported, but this is for 2010. So we've got jQuery, we've got SP services hooked in there. So now let's go back to our slider. And remember I said that the only thing that differentiates this and makes this a SharePoint slider is how we're going to get our data. So let's just, I'm just going to comment this out real quick, just so we have reference to it. And what we're going to do is start a new SP services call. And we're going to do a get list items. If you haven't checked out this plugin, you really should go on to spservices.codeplex.com and give it a whirl. It's pretty cool. Okay, so here's where we get into our plugin. So we're past settings, and settings, we're passing the list URL and the list name to our settings variable. So here for our web URL, we're going to use settings.listURL. And then for the list name, settings.listName. So now dynamically we know, based on what the user put, which list and which URL we should be looking in. This is just a bit of SharePoint speak right here, but just these few camel fields here. I'll do a few a little bit later on. Okay, so once our function is complete, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to store our data in a variable called data, which should sound pretty familiar. And we're going to use a function of SP services that filters out every row that it gets back from SharePoint and stores it, it converts the XML to JSON, which is quite nice. Okay, so now there's our data. So now what we're doing right now is we're doing a false, we're not doing asynchronous. We'll do that a little bit later, but I'm just returning it. We're waiting for it, and then we're just going to return data. And because we're not doing it there, I'm actually going to declare data up here, and I'll set it there. Okay, so that's our data. Now I'm not inside of SharePoint right now, but this is the function that's going to get us our data. So we're going to call getListItems, which is going to go to this URL, find this list, get all the items. It's going to make sure to include all the properties, and then it's going to put everything into a JSON file. Now we're going to kind of just talk here about SharePoint itself. Obviously, people name their their columns differently in SharePoint. So what we need to do is make this plugin a little bit more flexible to allow for different plugin titles for columns. And so here's what we'll do. Right now we're expecting a field called image, a field called link, and a field called title. So up here in format data, we're getting our data back, and we've got our settings. And so instead of just saying link, what we're going to do is we're going to set the value of link. So we're going to say link is equal to settings let's put this down here actually, inside our for loop. So we're going to set the value of link, and link is going to be, data I, and we're going to say settings.link column. And so what this is going to do is the users, whenever they instantiate this function, is they're going to go over to index.html. They're going to say the link column is called link. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say the caption column is called title. And the image column out of the box is called encoded abs URL. And so we can set that to anything we want, but these are kind of a way for the user to tell the system what the column names are. So if we come back here, we can do the same thing for all of those. So link, image, and caption. We'll change this to caption. Image column, caption column. Let me make sure I name those correctly. Image column, caption column, link column. Yep. And so in case there's nothing, then we'll just pass in, oops, an empty string. Great. And so now we've aliased link, image, and caption with whatever the user's passed in that's coming in from SharePoint. So we can keep this function the same and just depend on what the user's got coming in. And if you want to, what you could do is you could set these defaults. So we could set, especially image column, we could set image column to default. That way the user doesn't ever have to do it themselves. You can just leave it there. We can assume that link column, we're not going to assume link column is anything actually. Title column, caption column. We'll assume that's title. And you don't have to set these, it's just something nice for your users. That way, in case you want to tell your users they don't have to set the absolute URL, just have them assume that they're going to be using picture libraries, which by default stores images as the encoded absolute URL. So I haven't hooked this up with a SharePoint server. I'm running on localhost, but let me show you one that's finished. So here's one that has some pictures from an image library coming in. Just a couple pictures from a SharePoint picture library. Here's another version that has 2 per slide. And here's one that has 1 per slide but doesn't have a caption. And so you can see this works quite well. This is actually running live on SharePoint right now. So it works quite well. And it's just using this little plugin. So now we can remove our fake data. Save. And just for one little piece of, one little bell and whistle we can add here is in our data we can actually have the user limit how many options are returned, how many rows are returned. So we'll say limit. And then up here we can set limit by default to 0, which is everything. But then if a user wants to come into the index.html, they can say limit only 5. And of course, if you're used to SP services and things like that, you could expand this camel query to, you could create a camel query to sort by date modified or sort by, again, a custom column used by the user that they wanted to sort by. So you could really expand this a lot, but basically what this is just showing you is how to create a custom plugin that allows the user to pass in settings and then allows them to hook into SP services or whatever you're using to get data from your system. For the next set of videos, what I'm going to do is show you how to kind of bring everything together, wrap it all up, and then put it, in an easy to use format for users to kind of manage. Because right now, even though this HTML is very simple, we're still including 4 scripts, 2 CSS files, a function and a div. In the end, what we want the user to be able to do is just install maybe 1, maybe 2 files, and have access to all of this power. So in the next few videos we'll cover how to do that.